This former state hospital for the mentally insane is part history site, part hotbed of paranormal activity.
As a child, who hasn't dreamed of a favorite doll or a teddy bear coming to life and being a very best friend forever and ever? Robert Eugene Otto had a doll who stayed with him his whole life, an artist and his muse in eccentric Key West, Florida. This doll was given to the 6-year-old Robert Eugene by the family's Bahamian maid, who was said to practice voodoo. It was the perfect likeness of the young boy and was even named Robert after him. As a young boy, Eugene developed a strange fascination with Robert. He spent long hours alone with his doll, talking to it, and when anything went wrong at home, Eugene always knew who to blame. It was Robert, he would tell his parents. Robert did it. Robert did it. Eugene Otto became one of the most celebrated artists in this famous artists' colony. His fame grew beyond the southerly Keys, as did his wealth. He preferred to paint in seclusion, alone, indoors, and with Robert always by his side. Eugene settled down with his wife Anne here at the artist's house close to Duval Street in Key West. Robert, of course, went with them. Anne disliked the doll from the moment she first saw it. It gave her chills just to look at it, and she didn't like her husband's obsession with it. Still, she humored him, and Robert was given a room of his very own, away in the attic. There he stayed until Eugene told his wife that Robert was angry and demanding a room with a view. Despite Anne's objections, he moved Robert out of the attic and down to the turret room. Robert was seated at the window looking out over the street. Children on their way to school said they saw Robert through the windows moving about the turret room, glowering at them. Inside the house, Eugene became increasingly irrational and violent, smashing things and lashing out at his wife and screaming like a madman, and then all of a sudden, he would be himself again, and he would always say exactly the same thing. It was Robert. Robert did it. Robert's influence seemed to grow stronger and stronger. A plumber working alone in the turret room with Robert fled the house in terror. He later said he'd heard Robert giggling. Other visitors swore that Robert's expression changed when they looked at him. Sometimes they said that he looked like pure evil. Eugene became sicker and sicker. Becoming so despondent, he locked himself away in the turret room until he finally died with Robert the doll by his side. Free at last, Anne fled the house, leaving Robert behind in the attic. The new owners discovered him soon after moving in. They took one look at Robert and knew that this, whatever it was something they definitely didn't want in their home. Robert ended up here, awaiting visitors in the East Martello Museum, where he holds an eerie fascination for everyone who sees him. Visitors to the museum, completely ignorant of this strange story, have been shocked as the expression on his face apparently changed before their very eyes. A psychic investigator said that Robert's soul is slowly dying, his hair turning white as he grows older. Today, the artist's house where Robert once lived is a guest house. Stay a night if you will. Go ahead. He's still here, in the darkest recesses of the attic, say the staff, who avoid coming up here. And after her death, Eugene's wife Anne appeared here too. Her ghost stalks the turret room. Anne is trapped here now with Robert, the doll. And as for Robert, the artist, he tragically discovered that the things we love to possess sometimes end up possessing us.
New York has a number of properties that are believed to be haunted, but the most famous of them all is the ominously named House of Death in Greenwich Village. Built in 1856, to begin with, it was a popular place with the rich, becoming home to the family of a railroad tycoon. They eventually moved out in the 1980s, though, and since then the house became associated with strange happenings. In 1897, the new owner, a famous cyclist, experienced a moment of recklessness where he hit a young boy while riding and was subsequently arrested. He soon moved out of the house, and the next resident was none other than Mark Twain, who also wrote of paranormal experiences, such as floating pieces of wood and peculiar sensations. Later residents reported seeing ghoulish shadows, visions, and strange noises, and then in 1987 something terrible happened. A young girl was killed there with repeated blows to her head, and the police that attended the scene reported eerie happenings and strange behaviors by everyone present. The parents were arrested and convicted with drugs blamed for their actions, but there has always been the suspicion that the strange aura of the house may have influenced their behavior, with strange events also reported in the neighboring homes. Is it possible that the dark shadow surrounding this house is now spreading? Number 11.
Great, he left a trail of freshly boiled bones all across Pennsylvania. He quickly placed the remaining bones in a coffin and proceeded to the reburial ceremony here at St. David's Church in Radnor, Pennsylvania. Isaac never spoke about what had happened. As the remains of Anthony's remains were laid under this monument, there was one member of his family who knew every detail, and would certainly have been turning in his grave had there been enough of him to complete such a maneuver. But this quiet graveyard burial wasn't the end of Mad Anthony Wayne's story. In 1823, the blockhouse at Erie burnt down. His grave became overgrown. Out of respect, Anthony was dug up for a second time and buried again under a reconstructed blockhouse. Now, after his military burial, his family's reburial, and his far less dignified ceremony, Mad Anthony Wayne received his fourth and final burial nearly 100 years after his first. It seems that after all the relocating his body went through, Anthony had had enough and did some moving of his own. Every New Year's Eve here along the icy wooded roads of Pennsylvania, travelers have reported seeing a dismembered body searching through the bushes. Gliding over the snow, he stops occasionally to wrestle with a supernatural dog for what appears to be an arm or a leg bone. New Year's Eve was Anthony's birthday. What better reason for him to have this ghostly get-together? So if you're traveling the roads of Pennsylvania next New Year's Eve, you may just catch a glimpse of the confused cadaver pulling himself together.
The Octagon House, another of the most haunted and oldest historical houses in Washington, D.C., the Octagon has had its fair share of apparitions and otherworldly presences. Museum employees, curators, and the public have all claimed to have seen and felt specters on the spiral staircase, the Octagon's second and third floor landings, the rear garden area, and the third floor bedroom. The house's history cries out for a good haunting. The townhouse was built for John and Ann Taylor, who were distantly related to George Washington, and was later lived in by President James Madison and his wife Dolly. When the White House was set afire by the British in 1814, in fact, the Treaty of Ghent, which ended the War of 1812, was ratified in the Octagon. Legend has it that Dolly Madison didn't ever leave the Octagon. The first reported sighting on record was in 1912. The Washington Herald reported that Dolly's famed parties continued in the afterlife, saying that, between midnight and dawn, there is a low hum of pleasant conversation, the sound of silver and the clink of glasses, as a splendid company with gay liveried men drive up and take away the departing guests. Her ghost is said to reside in the drawing room, and a fresh scent of lilacs linger whenever she appears.
This is just a quick reminder to subscribe. You'll be notified every time we upload new and fascinating content. If you enjoy this video, hit the like button. These are an immense help to our channel. Thanks, guys.
This is Old Town San Diego, California, and this is the Whaley House. Built in the 1850s for Judge Whaley and his young wife. The couple loved their beautiful new home, so much so that 150 years later, they're still here. In fact, the house has proven so popular with visitors beyond the grave that it can now claim to be one of the most haunted houses in the world. Judge Thomas Whaley. often seen standing on the landing, or presiding over ghostly trials in his courtroom, a feature of the house which Thomas was particularly proud. And in the middle of the night, his deep laughter can be heard echoing through the children's nursery. His wife Anna is here too. Dumbfounded visitors watch as she appears and glides from the study, across the music room, and through the door. Nowhere in the house is safe from ghostly intruders. Stay too long in the parlor and you'll realize that you're not alone. This is the favorite haunt of a mysterious woman who is described by many spooked visitors as swarthy and wearing large gold earrings. And here in the bedroom, people who stop to rest on the settee have reported finding themselves sitting next to a ghostly woman wearing a green gingham dress. Eerily silent after generations of children playing, even the backyard is haunted. Lurking here, a shy spirit is believed to have been a playmate of the Whaley children. She met her tragic end on this very spot. According to legend, during a playful chase, she ran headlong into a washing line, instantly breaking her neck. Her ghost only appears to children. Then there's the mischievous poltergeist who swings the chandelier, sets off burglar alarms, and stalks through the house brandishing a meat cleaver. There's even a phantom spotted dog called Dolly who runs down the hall. And this music box starts playing by itself, as does this piano. Unless you're unlucky and the music stops, then you might hear the Whaley children crying outside the music room door. The photographs are haunted, and visitors looking at the courtroom display sometimes see spectral images appearing in the prints. This photograph captured a remarkable image of a face hanging over Thomas's study. Another photographer sensed a distinct cold sensation when taking these eerie shots showing a hazy aura in the bedroom. There are many theories about the Whaley House hauntings. Museum director June Redding has her own ideas.
This couple were very much in love. Anna's presence is felt in the parlor and in the music room where she did so much entertaining. And Thomas is on the property. He has been, his figure has been seen at dusk, looking into the rose garden and looking up at the house. He built this house for her.
A more grisly explanation might stem from the hundreds of criminals sent to their deaths from this courthouse. The most famous being Yankee Jim, a notorious thief sent to death for stealing a boat.
He was hung on the property where the house is set now.
Indeed, the precarious scaffold was erected here, where this archway now separates the parlor from the music room.
Unfortunately, the old townspeople weren't very learned in the hanging, and the rope was a little bit too long. And it took Yankee Jim anywhere from 15 minutes to 45 minutes in some reports to die. And as a result, through that injustice of him not having a quick death, that's supposed to be one of the reasons why he's hung around.
In the 1960s, San Diego City College staged a play in the courtroom entitled Yankee Jim. But during the show, sounds of footsteps from the rooms above became so loud and persistent that the terrified theater audience fled the building. Yankee Jim has not been performed since. The last Whaley to live in the house, Thomas's daughter Corinne, would never go upstairs. There's something bad in the upper rooms, she told friends, who also heard heavy footsteps coming from above. No one had any doubt that this malevolent force was Yankee Jim, restless and vengeful. If you find this scale of hauntings hard to believe, don't take our word for it. You don't even have to believe the Whaley House Guide or the expert ghost hunter. In 1995, the United States Chamber of Commerce released a list of the most haunted sites in the country. And at number 1, the Whaley House. And that's official.
St. Louis Cemetery, New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans is a town steeped in mythical traditions like witchcraft and vampires. Numerous cemeteries dot the landscape, but the St. Louis Cemetery is the oldest in the city. Here, visitors will discover ornate above-ground tombs and mausoleums, winding footpaths, and crumbling memorials. Many people have reported claims of ghost sightings here. Bell Witch Cave, Adams, Tennessee. The site where John Bell and his family were tormented by a ghost now known as the Bell Witch is open to brave visitors who wish to explore the spirit world. The legend varies, but most accounts claim that Kate Batts, a neighbor of the Bell family, believed she was cheated out of property in a land purchase. Kate continued to torture the entire Bell family, physically abusing the youngest daughter, Betsy, and cursing John. Visitors claim that any object taken from the site is cursed, while many have reported encountering a violent force while on the property. Technology doesn't work there either, with cameras mysteriously malfunctioning when users try to capture an image.
Gettysburg National Military Park. Ghosts remain here, walking among the living. Are there some for whom death is a closed door, so they are forced to remain here, waiting for a peace that will never come? In the field of parapsychology, there are many circumstances that are thought to contribute to a haunting. A violent death, a life cut short, perhaps an extreme of emotion or energy at the very instant that life is extinguished. Here, on the battlefields of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, all those factors combined when in 3 days over 50,000 men were killed or injured. Theirs were not easy deaths. The war was a turning point in military history, combining old-fashioned tactics and new weapons. Men marched side by side into the battlefield, and side by side they died, blown apart by clouds of shrapnel, until what remained was nothing more than a bloody red mist where once there had been a man. Lives were ended here in such vast numbers and in such traumatic and terrible circumstances that these peaceful acres can now claim to be some of the most haunted places in the world. This clump of trees is known as Reynolds Woods. This small wooded corner has seen more American casualties than any piece of land this size in the world. It was here that Major John F. Reynolds received a fatal wound from a sharpshooter's bullet. As the sun sets and the shadows lengthen, he can still be seen walking amongst the trees, looking for his men, unaware that his rightful tenure on this earth was ended long ago. When a psychic was brought to this spot, she experienced a sharp, unbearable pain in her back, in exactly the same place as Reynolds' wound. These fields are known as Iverson's Pits, the last resting place of 512 men from the North Carolinian Brigade, commanded by Brigadier General Alfred Iverson. With no advanced skirmishers to draw opposing fire and no reports from scouts to plan the attack, Iverson ordered his men into battle with the words, "Give 'em hell." Hell it was, but not for the Union soldiers who were safely dug in behind barricades. A captain in the 23rd North Carolina Regiment later wrote, "Unarmed, unled, we went to our doom. Deep and long must the desolate homes and orphan children of North Carolina rue the rashness of that hour." In the aftermath of the battle, the dead were buried in shallow graves where the grass would always grow a deeper green and crops grew taller with such rich fertilizer. And for many years, laborers on Forney Farm, which encompassed this land, saw more than they expected on lonely evenings. Eventually, they all refused to work these fields and the farm was sold. The area most steeped in supernatural lore is surely here, a rock-strewn hillside known chillingly as Devil's Den. Sightings here invariably include a shabbily dressed barefoot man in a floppy hat. He has been identified as a Texan soldier, one of the men who attacked this formidable position against a barrage of enemy fire. One of the most horrible stories from the war and its aftermath occurred here on Seminary Hill. These imposing buildings were used as hospitals, where shattered limbs were hastily amputated amidst the constant din of screams and moans from those undergoing surgery. Outside, huge piles of amputated limbs and dead bodies accumulated until they reached the height of the window, when they would finally be buried. It was in one of these piles, one of these unthinkable collections of decaying human remains, that a survivor was found. He had been presumed dead and thrown on the heap, almost suffocating underneath the mound of death and destroyed flesh. The now crazed man died shortly after being discovered. His demented spirit remains frozen here for eternity, struggling to come to terms with the horror of his demise. Even those who were buried on consecrated land seem to have difficulty leaving here. Visitors to this cemetery have reported a spectral blue mist hovering just above the ground. The mist lingers throughout the dusk and into the night, but cannot be captured on film. Spirits can be found in many places here, yet visitors to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania often leave with more than just the memory of one isolated haunting. As the night draws in over these once blood-soaked fields, the restless spirits of men who died here emerge in such numbers that it seems hauntings are inevitable. When visiting the park, there's plenty of time to catch glimpses of ghosts. The ghosts of Gettysburg. Gettysburg is the scene of ghostly romances as well. It was destined to become more than just a crossroads in the fields of Pennsylvania for three young people. Tragically, for a whole generation of American men, this town was the end of the road. Gettysburg. Jenny Wade was born in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania on May 21, 1843. Her childhood sweetheart was a local boy, Jack Skelly. They fell in love, and when war came, Jack signed up to fight for his country. It was understood by the townsfolk that as soon as the Southern rebels were beaten, there would be a wedding in town. Jack's best friend Wesley Culp, like most patriotic young men, signed up as soon as the war started, but Wesley chose to fight for the Confederates. In a war that covered huge areas of the country, fate would ensure that the two friends, Jack and Wesley, would find themselves on opposing sides of the battle lines. On a hot, sticky evening in June 1863, General Robert E. Lee ordered the 2nd Corps of the Army of Northern Virginia to clear the lower Shenandoah Valley of Union forces. The ensuing fighting was some of the worst in the whole war, and when the smoke cleared, over 2,400 Union soldiers had surrendered. Among these men was Jack Skelly, mortally wounded in the battle. When Wesley recognized his old friend from Gettysburg, he took him to a nearby hospital. Jack was on his deathbed, but he wasn't ready to die, not before he had sent word of his love to his sweetheart. When the order came for the Confederate Army to move onwards, Jack made his friend Wesley promise to deliver a message to Jenny Wade as soon as he returned home to Gettysburg. Wesley found himself back home sooner than he thought. Unfortunately, the war had come with him. Wesley had carried the message over many miles, and now the end of his journey was in sight. Jenny was staying here at her sister's house on the far side of Gettysburg. Since the day her sweetheart Jack had left for war, she had been waiting for news from him. Now, as soldiers filled the streets, she waited anxiously by the door, baking bread for the hungry men and listening for the one voice amongst many who would bring her happiness. Ironically, the man who had the message, Wesley Culp, got as far as this hill, where he was killed in battle. After fighting in some of the worst skirmishes of the Civil War, traveling far and wide across the South, Wesley died here in the North, on Culp's Hill, his family's farm. Even if Wesley had made it to the Wade house, it would have been in vain. Jack Skelly's girlfriend, who many thought would become his wife, was dead. The only civilian life lost in Gettysburg. Jenny Wade was baking bread, waiting for news when a sniper's bullet ended her life. She was carried into this cellar where she died, never having heard the message from Jack Skelly, unaware that her sweetheart was already dead. But this is not the end of this tragic story. Even today, visitors to the Jenny Wade house are reluctant to go down into the cellar where she died. There have been reports of a ghostly presence. Jenny's restless spirit can be seen pacing the floor, waiting for word from her sweetheart, waiting in vain for the message that will never come in a town so haunted.
Queen Mary in California. The Queen Mary was the premier ocean liner for transatlantic travel, carrying celebrities of all types. During World War II, it was painted grey and used as a troop ship, but after the war was over, it was returned to its former grandeur. The Queen Mary was retired from service in 1967 and permanently docked in Long Beach, California, where it became a floating hotel. Although dozens of people died on the ship over the years, including at least 2 men crushed by a door in the engine room. Ghostly women in 1930s style bathing suits are often spotted around the swimming pool, and telephones ring without benefit of callers. And the forlorn cries of children are heard in the night. Unlike many hotels which downplay alleged paranormal activity, the Queen Mary embraces its spectral residents, offering daily ghost tours.
The Fort Magruder Hotel in Williamsburg, Virginia, is renowned for its paranormal activity. Originally a Civil War fortress, the hotel's history sets the stage for ghostly tales. Visitors have reported numerous sightings, making it a hotbed for paranormal enthusiasts. One of the most well-known apparitions is that of a Confederate soldier, believed to be a sentinel guarding the grounds. Guests have witnessed his spectral figure patrolling the hotel corridors. There are also accounts of strange sounds, disembodied voices, and flickering lights hinting at the presence of restless spirits. Some visitors have even reported feeling an eerie presence and experiencing unexplained chills in certain areas of the hotel. With its rich history and haunting experiences, the Fort Magruder Hotel serves as a captivating destination for those intrigued by the supernatural.
The Sallie House, Kansas. Built in the mid-1800s in Atchison, Kansas, from the outside the notorious Sallie House looks like any other. It is, however, considered to be one of the most haunted houses in the U.S. And while it's possible to stay there overnight, all guests have to sign a waiver upon entry to take responsibility for any injuries they may suffer while on the property. The home once belonged to the town's doctor and was where he treated all of his patients. One day, the mother of 6-year-old Sallie rushed in with her daughter in her arms after she had collapsed with abdominal pains. The doctor knew straight away that this was a case of appendicitis and that he'd have to operate quickly to prevent the organ from bursting inside her body. There was just enough time to give her some painkillers, but not enough to let them fully take effect. So as the surgery began, the house was filled with chilling screams from the girl. Unfortunately, the procedure failed, and Sallie died on the operating table, with her final thought being of this evil man who she believed was torturing her. More than 100 years later, in 1993, a couple moved into the house and soon began experiencing weird events that appeared to prove that the spirit of Sallie has been trapped there. Strange cold spots, unexplained fires, and mysterious attacks on the husband became common, as did technical malfunctions, objects seemingly moving on their own, and animals refusing to enter some of the rooms.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
There's at least one inmate who served well beyond his life term and is still here.
2 inmates that had committed suicide here. One had hung himself, and the story behind that is he was a local resident. He was arrested for a crime that he allegedly did not commit, and was public knowledge that he was not the one who did it. And it was a young man, and he eventually hung himself in one of the cells. The cell we're sitting in here, there was an inmate that committed suicide by taking his mattress off his bed. He put it up against the cell door and set it on fire, and they weren't able to get to him. We have a young lady who was a manager here a few years ago, was in the ladies' room, and as she came out, so she went in the ladies' room, there's a large mirror in there, and the image of the ghost was in the mirror. She quit the next day. She was terrified. She actually quit the next day. And myself, one night as I was closing the restaurant, I was doing my rounds, walking through, and there's a coffee machine, and it was still on with a pot of coffee. I turned the machine off, I took the pot of coffee into the kitchen, I emptied it, and I did my rounds. As I came back through, and I was the only one in the restaurant, the coffee machine had been turned back on, and there was a full pot of coffee sitting there. And I don't drink coffee, so I know it wasn't me.
Even the hauntings don't seem to deter visitors from turning themselves in, and locals go stir-crazy just to get a table. Most nights, every one of the 16 cells is full, so is this another case of overcrowded jails?
Oh no, not at all. No overcrowding in this jail. It's very comfortable.
The former Tijuana's is so liberal, it's the world's only jail where the inmates are asked to go home at night.
Step Cemetery, Benton, Indiana. Only 24 or so crumbling grave markers remain in this famously haunted cemetery in Indiana. Legend has it that it was founded by a cult called the Crabbites, who sacrificed small animals and participated in sex orgies. Another story holds that a mother of an infant who died was so distraught that she went to the cemetery and dug up the child's body after it was buried. Grieving, she took her own life. Visitors claim to have seen her ghost, dressed in black, weeping over her daughter's grave near the side of an old stump that has since rotted away years ago. Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. This former state hospital for the mentally insane is part history site, part hotbed of paranormal activity. Ghosts of Civil War soldiers and former patients are said to be walking through the 2.5 miles of hallways. Visitors claim to see things move or feel the presence of spirits. The largest hand-cut stone building in North America, this mammoth granite structure was constructed in 1858. The asylum originally housed 250 residents at a time, but at its peak in the 1950s, more than 2,000 patients called this place home. Trans-Allegheny stopped treating patients in 1994, but brave thrill seekers can roam the halls on any number of special guided tours, including a nighttime flashlight ghost hunting experience.
On June 21, 1877, 10 men went to their deaths in Pennsylvania, the largest mass execution in American history. And since that day, controversy has raged over whether justice was done. At the prison in Pottsville, where 6 of the men died, a plaque now testifies to the mistakes that were made. But here in Jim Thorpe, where the remaining 4 men died, the only evidence is this, known as the handprint on the wall. One of the most mysterious stories in American history, transcending the link between the natural and the supernatural, and extending a ghostly reminder from ancient injustices to the present day. This is the story of 2 men, both hanged unjustly over 100 years ago, Alexander Campbell and Jack Kehoe. For both men, their quest for justice continued long after their untimely deaths. June 21, 1877. Jim Thorpe, then known as Mauchunk, in the anthracite coal region of Pennsylvania. Inside this bleak building, the Carbon County Jail, 4 men spent their last night on Earth listening to the terrible sound of their gallows being constructed. Then a noise even more fearsome, the testing of the gallows, heavy sandbags being dropped at the end of a rope, which the next day would dispatch each of the condemned men in turn. Every time a sandbag dropped, the sound echoed around the prison. In each cell, every man knew what it meant. That night, a schoolmaster from nearby Hazleton brought along a group of children. Far from being awed by the solemn spectacle, the children danced on the scaffold as the wives and children of the condemned men looked on and wept. Finally, the men were alone. Alexander Campbell, Michael J. Doyle, John Donahue, and Edward Kelly. Each man waited out the night and prayed. In a small town like Mauchunk, a hanging was always a big event. Tomorrow would be remembered for a long time. In nearby Pottsville, the atmosphere was more somber. Here, behind these forbidding walls, 6 men were also to die that same day. Thomas Duffy, James Carroll, James Rorty, James Boyle, Hugh McGeehan, and Thomas Munley. Each man had been tried and found guilty of murder or accessory to murder. They had been arrested as a result of an undercover operation by the Pinkerton Detective Agency, hired by the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company. The ringleader was Alexander Campbell. Campbell had been a miner and then a hotel owner, convicted of accessory to several murders. Historian Patrick Campbell is the grandnephew of the condemned man.
Before Alec Campbell left this particular cell to go to his execution, he, according to legend, turned around and placed his hand on this particular spot on the wall and swore his innocence and said that this particular handprint would remain on that wall to prove that Carbon County was hanging an innocent man. And it has remained there ever since.
The handprint on the wall is one of the most astounding phenomena in the world of the paranormal. Yet even more incredible are the events which led to its creation, events which led to the injustices of June 21st, 1877. On that day, 10 men went to their deaths, all proclaiming their innocence.
The actual morning of the execution, they were very calm as they walked up to the gallows and had very little to say as they were dropped into the next ward.
Franklin Castle. Built in 1881 for wealthy German immigrant Hans Tiedemann, Franklin Castle was a cursed house from the beginning. His 15-year-old daughter, Emma, passed away there from diabetes not long after in 1891, and his mother followed shortly. Not only that, but 3 more of his children passed away over the following years. In response, Hans built up the home extensively to distract himself and his wife from their family's fate. They built turrets, a ballroom, gargoyles, and really castled the place up. Hidden passageways and rooms were also rumored to have been installed for use during Prohibition and bootlegging. His wife passed away of liver disease in 1895, and Hans sold the house. No family remained to inherit. Hans is said to have committed terrible things in his home, which is why the castle has its haunted reputation. The Romano family moved into the castle in 1968 and reported some ghostly encounters. They tried exorcisms several times, but by 1974 had given up. They sold the castle, which was later owned by Julie Garland's late husband, Michael DeVinco. He spent a fortune on its renovation, and in the 1990s, a skeleton was found in one of the castle's closets. Sounds like Franklin Castle had some skeletons in the closet, literally. The Octagon House. Another of the most haunted and oldest historical houses in Washington, D.C., the Octagon has had its fair share of apparitions and otherworldly presences. Museum employees, curators, and the public have all claimed to have seen and felt specters on the spiral staircase, the Octagon's 2nd and 3rd floor landings, the rear garden area, and the 3rd floor bedroom. The house's history cries out for a good haunting. The townhouse was built for John and Ann Taylor, who were distantly related to George Washington, and was later lived in by President James Madison and his wife Dolly. When the White House was set afire by the British in 1814, in fact, the Treaty of Ghent, which ended the War of 1812, was ratified in the Octagon. Legend has it that Dolly Madison didn't ever leave the Octagon. The first reported sighting on record was in 1912. The Washington Herald reported that Dolly's famed parties continued in the afterlife, saying that, between midnight and dawn, there is a low hum of pleasant conversation, the sound of silver and the clink of glasses, as a splendid company with gay liveried men drive up and take away the departing guests. Her ghost is said to reside in the drawing room, and a fresh scent of lilacs linger whenever she appears.
The St. James Hotel in Cimarron, New Mexico, offers visitors unique adventures that just might involve ghosts. This historic structure was rescued from ruin in 1985. Room 4 is the Jesse James Room. Room 17 is the Mary Lambert Room. Room 18 is one you may ask about, but don't expect to stay there. That room allegedly houses the malevolent ghost of Thomas J. Wright. Legend also states several guests died mysteriously in there. The St. James was built by Henry Lambert, who was once a chef for President Lincoln. Lambert's hotel rewarded him through the years. Many notable characters stayed there as time passed. Notable guests include most Old West figures such as Jesse James, Wyatt and Morgan Earp, Doc Holliday, Billy the Kid, Buffalo Bill Cody, Annie Oakley, Kit Carson, and many more. Gunfights often broke out in the hotel. Current estimates suggest that over 25 men were killed in the hotel. The historic hotel was renovated to surpass its former glory. Visitors report the 2nd floor is most active. The most common manifestations are cold spots, the smell of phantom cigar smoke, objects fly off the walls, and electrical items commonly short out.
Would you stay at the St. James? Paranormal enthusiasts have found much interest in the old temple. Reported activity includes elevators operating themselves, the sounds of people climbing the stairs, and the sensation of someone staring. This structure is the largest of its kind. It frequently hosts movies, concerts, and serves as a venue for weddings, parties, and other large groups. George A. Mason and Company broke ground on the temple building in 1920. Life was not easy for the building, and there have been close calls with destruction. Fortunately, artists have stepped in previously to keep the building safe.
This is just a reminder to subscribe to enjoy our growing collection of paranormal content. Don't forget to like your favorite episode and ring the bell to be notified of new content. As always, thanks for watching.
Mining was a tough way to earn a living for immigrants. For many, it was the only way they could get by. Wages were low and the shifts long. In some towns, workers were not even paid in dollars, but in scrip to be used in the company store, where prices were invariably high. Often they ended a week having earned $5 but owing the company $7.
Being down in the dark for 12 hours out of your day, not seeing the light of day, that plays on you for a while. First of all, it's the condition of the mines, being in the dark. I mean, there are no lights in the mine, except for the lamp on your head.
At a time when trade unions were unheard of and worker benefits consisted of having your body dumped on your front porch if you were killed in a mine accident, the miners banded together for protection. Most small mines had been driven out of business by the larger companies who also owned the railroads. It was against these powerful organizations that the fledgling unions pitted themselves. The organizers tended to be the more educated men of the community.
Well, Alex Campbell and my great-grandfather both ran taverns, and the tavern was the center of the community for the Irish miner. They didn't have any kind of cultural centers or halls of any other type of meeting place.
Joe Wayne's great-grandfather was Jack Kehoe.
Quite frankly, because of their education, they were looked up to by the other miners. They could read, they could write. They were older than a lot of the men who were involved.
Campbell and Kehoe were indifferent to the problems that the power structure out here had with their activities. They thought they were here in America, that nothing could happen to them.
Kehoe and Campbell had the mine owners worried, so they responded by hiring armed guards to act as a private police force. Franklin Gowan, president of the largest mine company in the area, went one step further. He engaged a private detective agency, started recently by Alan Pinkerton. Together, they would bring down the miners. Instead of openly attacking the Union, Pinkerton and Gowan planned a covert operation. It was claimed that the Molly Maguires were a secret terrorist organization. Gowan used the media to spread fear until people believed the anthracite coal region was under attack from the Molly Maguires and something had to be done.
You had Alan Pinkerton advertise throughout his ranks for anybody of Irish descent who knew anything about Irish secret society. And the one who presented the most definitive story on them was a fellow by the name of James McParland.
It was McParland who was responsible for bringing the Molly Maguires to the gallows.
McParland came into the area and portrayed himself as being a wanted criminal for passing queer counterfeit money and also wanted for murder in upper state New York. He was alleged to have been a great drinker and fighter.
When McParland, alias James McKenna, arrived in Schuylkill County, he headed straight for this tavern frequented by the Irish miners. He made himself known to the bodymaster of the local chapter of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, thought by the Pinkertons to be the cover for the Molly Maguires. Jack Kehoe was one such bodymaster, and Alec Campbell was the other. McParland befriended Campbell, but this friendship ended when McParland revealed himself to be an undercover agent and accused Campbell of 2 murders. The first murder took place here in Tamaqua. The victim was policeman Benjamin Yost. Yost was known to have many enemies among the miners of Tamaqua. He was gunned down at this street lamp and was carried into his home where he died in the early hours of the morning. The 2 men arrested, Hugh McGeehan and James Doyle, were not from Tamaqua and had no reason to be there. They had a gun and empty shells in their pockets and were leaving the area in a hurry. Also with them when they were arrested was James Powderkeg Kerrigan. He would turn state's evidence, and it was on his testimony that much of the prosecution's case depended. As alleged leader of the local chapter of the Molly Maguires, Campbell was accused of masterminding the murder. The next murder victim was mine owner John P. Jones. Again, the case rested on the evidence of McParland, corroborated only by Kerrigan's unreliable testimony. Campbell was accused of ordering the killing from his hotel here in Summit Hill. In both cases, McParland admitted he knew of the murders before they happened, but made no effort to stop them. He had his orders, Crimes must be committed so the arrests could be made. Campbell was also convicted of accessory to the murder of Morgan Powell, shot outside the McFadden store, still in the family to this day. Once again, the case rested on McParland, the man who had been commissioned to break the Union. Presiding over the trial was Judge Samuel Dreyer, a personal friend of Gowan and of local steel magnate Asa Packer. Prosecuting for the state was none other than Franklin Gowan, the man who years later would boast that he had spent over $4 million to break the miners' labor organization. The jury didn't take long to reach their verdicts. Alexander Campbell never had a chance. His last act was to leave his handprint on the wall, saying that it would remain there until the day his name was cleared. Nobody knows where he's buried. For McParland, the job of bringing down the Molly Maguires was not over. Now he turned his attention to the man considered to be the leader of the Irish community, Jack Kehoe. He was an elected constable and owned this Lansdowne bar, still in the Kehoe family. By the time McParland had finished with him, Kehoe would hang as a murderer, accused of a crime that was committed 15 years earlier. Kehoe had gone up against Gowan, and now he would pay the price.
Why dig up this crime 15 years after the fact? I look at it as not a conspiracy of the Molly Maguires to kill the mine owners, but rather a conspiracy against the Irish Americans who are involved in unionized labor, which is a whole new concept in American history of that era.
It was impossible for a court to prove Kehoe's guilt or innocence. The trial was a matter of conflicting hearsay and 15-year-old memories. But due to Gowan's manipulation of the media and the courts, he was said to be a Molly Maguire.
By the time John Kehoe's trial had been put on, all the media attention was already focused on the guilt of the Molly Maguires. Up to that point, they were all guilty. So once you label a man a Molly Maguire, chances are he will be found guilty.
The entire setup for my great-grandfather and 19 other men who danced the macabre death at the end of a rope was private industry. You had a private corporation in the form of the Philadelphia Reading Railroad Coal and Iron Company. You had private detective force in Allen Pinkerton. You had the various coal companies who used the coal and iron police, not affiliated in any way with the Commonwealth or with the county or any local government. And you had a prosecutor at their trials. Came right from the coal companies. The only thing a public official, or the only thing public about it was that the taxpayers provided the courtroom and they provided the jail cell. The fact was Jack Kehoe was considered the head of the Molly Maguires, and you had to get rid of the head. And regardless of who came up and testified, they were going to find him guilty.
Kehoe was hanged, proclaiming his innocence. This is his grave. Where the rest of the Maguires are buried remains a secret. 100 years later, his great-grandson Joe Wayne presented the details of the case to the governor of Pennsylvania in the hope that justice would be done and his great-grandfather would finally be able to rest in peace.
We got a call from the governor. We couldn't be there because of the inclement weather, and he stated he was ready to sign the pardon. And after a brief pause, he stated that a pardon of this nature would not be necessary today if justice was done 100 years ago when an innocent man came to trial. And they say the party started and it lasted about 4 days.
For Jack Kehoe, justice has finally been done. A plaque has been erected outside the prison where he was hanged, admitting that mistakes were made. But Alexander Campbell is still waiting. When Campbell made this print, it was his wish that his innocence be remembered. It has survived 120 years of attempts to scrub it off and even paint over it. Laboratory tests at Penn State University have determined that it doesn't contain any paint or dye pigment or oils from the hands of the many visitors. According to science, the handprint on the wall doesn't exist. The truth will probably never be known, but as long as visitors to the prison, now a museum, see the handprint and ask about the 10 men who were sent to their death in 1877, Alexander Campbell's legacy will remain.
Waverly was known to perform experimental surgery on patients, even surgeries removing ribs and lungs. The hospital was constructed with a death chute, a secret underground tunnel that connected with the nearby train station. A variety of spirits and activity haunt the facility, from the ghost of the children who died there to the evil entities that have obscure origins. Would you visit Waverly?
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share to keep fascinating content coming here at Nightmare Nexus.